Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for my review of the 8th studio EP from Virtual Riot. This one is called Throwback. This is actually only the second full review that I've ever done for a Disciple release, and the first review I've ever done for a Disciple EP release. And I guess kind of the reason behind that is because a lot of these EP releases on these big dubstep labels like Never Say Die and Disciple, they tend to have this strict formula to them. I talked a little bit more in depth about this on my Barely Alive domain review, so I would definitely suggest you guys go check that out if you haven't already. But I guess the same kind of deal follows for Virtual Riot as well, which is probably why I haven't covered his music yet on this channel. But that's probably because most of his EPs have been released through Disciple, and none of them seem to really have any kind of concept behind them. There just seem to be 4 or 5 tracks that he just kind of throws together depending on the stages of his career, what his sound is like, and that just gets pushed out, and there's nothing really more to it, and I haven't really found enough interest in those projects to review them as solid bodies of work on this channel. But this EP is a little different because it actually has a bit of a concept to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean I love it or even prefer it to his other EPs. In fact, I was quite a big fan of his last EP, Chemistry, an EP whose main theme was centered around its collaborators. I really like the way that Virtual Riot brought all these different artists together and showed off that he does have a lot of chemistry with them. And that made for the EP to be easily one of his most diverse yet in terms of sound design. And I guess with the Throwback EP, Virtual Riot kind of takes that idea and flips it on its head, with Throwback having absolutely no guest appearances in it, and with the EP of course having that throwback theme, which splits into 2 different directions on this. One with the term throwback being more of a retro concept. On the art we see things like Legos, Tetris blocks, even a Rubik's Cube on there, and then of course in the actual music itself we get a little bit of chiptune influence, which of course is going to feed that retro feel in there. But then I guess kind of the more overarching concept of this EP is that it is a throwback to Virtual Riot's old sound. And by old sound I don't mean the stuff that he was making very early on in his career. A lot of that was very kind of cheap sounding dubstep, but more of the kind of sound that kind of pushed him into popularities with stuff like We're Not Alone, his Monstercat releases like One for All for One, and then of course his remix of Lionhearted by Porter Robinson, which was actually the remix that probably made me fall in love with his music to begin with. And even though with the Throwback EP, Virtual Riot is kind of trying to mirror that same sound that he was making when I was first getting into his music, I just wasn't a big fan of this EP. Kind of getting those same nostalgic vibes that I was getting with the Third Party album, except in this case it's probably a lot less so because in Third Party's case I couldn't just go back into their early discography to hear music like that. In Virtual Riot's case, I definitely can. In fact, a lot of these songs sound almost identical to certain things in his early work. For example, the title track, which sounds very close to Virtual Riot's remix of Quantum by Astronaut, which was honestly one of my personal favorites from the EP, and that's probably because this style didn't necessarily hit it big when it came to dubstep. But for most of the other tracks on this EP, especially those electro house tracks that are really fueled by melodies and then have the little growls in between them, any number of EDM producers were and are still making this music, and I just didn't find a lot of interest in those ones, especially because a lot of the melodic structures of these tracks are really outdated at this point, and there's not really anything too complex in here either. Of course, with that, a couple of these COMPLEXTRO tracks have a little bit of variance that makes these songs a little bit more interesting, like at the end of In It, which turns into a bit of a more dubsteppy drop, and then the first drop of Button Masher, which is a little bit more of a hard electro house drop, and then the second one kind of turns back into that melodic style that most of the EP carries. I would say that generally my favorite songs on this EP are the dubstep ones, just because I feel like they carry a much different sound than most of the dubstep scene is going for right now. With the COMPLEXTRO tracks, I can't necessarily say the same, just because the sound has been recycled by so many different artists. But then at the end of the EP we get a little bit of a different feel. The song Part of Me is a bit of an outlier and doesn't really fit those concepts that I mentioned earlier in this review. In fact, the song is very different from anything that I've ever heard from Virtual Riot before, bringing a very smooth, jazz-influenced UK garage sound, which is kind of fueled by Virtual Riot's signature vocal chops and dubstep growls. And Virtual Riot definitely isn't the first big name in dubstep that I've seen do it. Obviously, Skrillex did it back on Recess, Barely Alive did it back on their debut album, but it is a new step, and a step that I can definitely appreciate and get down with. I also kind of hope that this song's placement at the very end of this EP kind of signifies Virtual Riot saying, okay, these songs are in the past and this is the future, kind of hinting at some potentially new sounding material, especially since we got a lot of different kind of sounds in his last EP before this one, Chemistry, like I already mentioned. Virtual Riot's got a lot of talent as a producer, and I'd hate to see that go to waste, and regardless of what I've said in this review, I am looking forward to his next project because I do think it's going to be a lot different than anything we've ever heard before from him, especially with him reflecting on all his past styles with this EP. For Throwback, I am feeling a decent 4 out of 10. If you haven't listened to this one yet, you can go ahead and do that via the Spotify link in the description. And if you have listened to this EP yet, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you later. Peace.